I'm Calisse Browne, and this is Steve Browne, and we started Metal Memories, which is flame painted copper.
The flame painting that you guys do on the copper to get the different coloring. So could you kind of talk me through what the process of that is like and how you got even drawn to that process to begin with?
Well, I'll start with how we got drawn to it, and then I'll let Steve explain the process. And so we started in jewelry, and copper flame painting is old as the times. And so as soon as copper and they started making jewelry out of it, they found flame would change the colors. And so that's very old. I think the newer technique is learning how to control the oxidation process through heat. And so we started in jewelry, we took some classes in it, and then they told us, if you go beyond a 6-inch piece, the science of oxidation changes and you're on your own. We haven't done bigger pieces in our classes. And so we went home armed with the information from the jewelry class and practiced for about 6 months until we came up with the technique that we were happy with and we could control. So we feel anybody can get color on copper, but learning to control and get the color you want where you want is the real art in it.
What is the process that you guys do to get the flame painting on the copper?
Okay, so in a very sterile way of describing it, it's a matter of knowing that you have to prepare the copper to be painted, not unlike what an oil painter has to do to her or his canvas to prepare for the colors to be applied. So we have to go through a process of preparing the copper by heating it and in essence creating an initial level of coloration on the copper, and then our process is we don't have any script per se aside from what's in our minds about what the piece needs to or we would like it to look like, and we start applying heat in a process that allows us to draw the outline or the preparation of the piece that we want to create. And once we've got the pieces, the copper drawn, then we can color the copper and paint it. That's the actual painting part of the process. And
all of that is done with a torch. So the drawing and the painting is all through heat and flame.
Right. And the painting involves knowing that there is a certain amount of heat that produces certain colors. So we can get up to 14 different colors out of the painting process by applying 14 different amounts of heat to the copper. And what we have to do is we have to be able to be aware of what the changes in the copper are that are occurring based on the amount of heat that we're applying using this torch, and then also how long the heat is on the copper. So as I said, there are 14 different colors in the, let's say, the copper paint palette, and you can actually see the copper changing as we heat the copper. And what we have to do is to understand when to stop that heating process to achieve the color that we want. If we pass the color, it's lost to us. So if we were looking for a certain type of blue, let's say, and we heat the copper too much and it passes that blue, then we can't reverse it unless we start again. We grind everything off and start again. But so we have to be precise enough in our understanding of where the copper heat is to stop the heat to preserve the color that we've achieved. And there's a technique that you have to know when you want to apply the heat in the appropriate order. So if you have a color that you've already applied, and you want to apply another color next to it that is hotter than the color that you used initially, you're going to get this bleeding effect. So you have to understand that you've got to put the, start with the hottest colors and then go to the cooler colors.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's most interesting about the technique is the humidity and the temperature of the day can change how the torch reacts with the copper. And so it's not always that you use a flame that's this long and you get this color. It is truly, you have to understand what the color sequence is and watch the metal and how it's reacting, because you may need a longer flame that day because there's more humidity in the air, or, and so it's really interacting with the metal. We sometimes call it a negotiation. The copper does get a bit of a say in what it wants to be, and sometimes you have to change what's in your mind's eye to go with what the copper wants to do that day. And so it's a very fluid art form.
Right, and the process, because you're using heats, and the copper does accumulate the heat and holds it for a while. What we have to do is not only say, okay, we want a certain color in a certain place in the design of the piece that we're working on, but we also have to realize that you can't have, the two colors right next to each other that you are using, because you have to control the amount of heat in the copper. So we do things like we use different designs or different patterns, rather than just heating one band of color. We may do things like use the side of the flame to create like a feather effect, or use other designs or motions with the flame so that there's not as much heat applied to a part of the copper that we've already painted. So in essence, we have to finesse the piece, and that finesse is really something that now we understand, because we've been doing this for quite a few years. We understand that we need to be careful in the design, and how we want that design to look, given that it's not all color, that you just put one color, then another color, then another color. The design has to incorporate these different approaches or different styles, if you will.
I'd say first of all, we do go in with the design in mind. It's not all, while we do it all freeform from our head, unless it's a really large piece, we may plan it out in graph paper just so we can better control the sizing and proportions. But we do decide, okay, are we going to incorporate a glass cardinal, which is an overlay that we glue on the piece and then cover it in resin, or are we going to do something abstract, or are we going to grind an image into it, which a lot of it is the grinding. But the way we get the dimension is, the first thing we do is we decide what we want the background action to be. So if you look at the piece, and obviously it's better when it's in person than a picture, as you move, the light's going to reflect from it differently, and you're going to see different aspects. That's what we call the background action. And so the first thing we do when we're preparing the copper is we do grinding on it to decide what that background reflection action we want to be. So we can make sun rays or something more abstract as far as the grinding goes, but that is a background action that tells you, how that light's going to reflect in the very background, right? So then we flame paint it and put the color on. And then we either do grinding to take some of the color off and put an image in it, such as a tree, or we've done horses, or you can grind your imagination, and what you can do with a tool that's going 6,000 RPMs is what your only limit. And then we also can cut out copper shapes and put an overlay in it. Or we can do glass, which we think glass and copper complement each other very well. And so we partner with a glass artist and get some glass shapes like a cardinal or other birds or some trees, and put that on there. And then the last step is we resin it, and that adds an additional depth, and it protects it and prevents any further oxidation. You have to seal every piece, or over time the copper would continue to oxidize and you would lose the art. It would just turn green brown. And so that's how you get, though, the very dimensional look to it, because it's very layered in how you approach the art.
You weld the copper cutout pieces to the background, or do you attach it in some other way?
Good question.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so the way we attach it is simple. We just use like a super glue, because then we resin over it. So it's not going anywhere when it's done, right? And so it's very easy to attach. We hand cut all the copper pieces out. And so that's all, we'll draw it out on the copper and then hand cut it.
Does it change properties when you're painting using the heat?
No, we do not use a flame that's hot enough to melt or cut the copper. And our copper's thick enough as well that it wouldn't do that. And so, no, it never changes. It may ripple a little bit, but by the time we put a wood backing on it, so you have something to hang it. And so that would straighten out anything that does, warp a little bit in the heat process.
Yeah, we accent the piece using other pieces, the cutout copper shapes that Calisse was just describing, or glass, working with a glass artist, or resin pieces. So we can apply resin shapes just before we resin the whole piece, and that incorporates those shapes or those accent pieces into the overall design of the art.
What do you find most rewarding about creating art with flame painted copper?
They're different answers.
So I think there's a couple of things. One, we like to work together. And so we both touch every piece, which makes it interesting, because you may have something in mind and you never know exactly how it's going to turn out, because you're never going to have the exact same image in mind and you're both touching the piece. So I think that creates a more complex and better piece of art. And we enjoy that process. And so that's one enjoyment. But for me, we named the company Metal Memories because we feel art is somewhat visceral, right? So when people see something, it usually means something to them. It's either a memory, or they're, want to just have a memory where they were that day or who they were with. And so there's a real joy in seeing somebody find something that means something to them. And I find that very rewarding.
Yeah, and we've been doing the art for 7 years now. And if you were to see some of our initial pieces versus what we are doing now, you see a maturity and a development that has occurred in our ability to create images that are more complex, more colorful, more representative of, let's say, nature, or even an abstraction. And I think that, to me, that's been very satisfying. But to answer the question slightly differently, Calisse is much better at the art than I am. Initially, I would try do things and I would get so upset I would just grind everything off and start again. I don't do that as much, if at all. So it for me to get to the level of complexity and representation takes longer. And so when I finally get there, that's satisfying to me. But I certainly do trail in terms of that developmental process, Calisse's work.
Steve has far better composition than me, and I think that's why we work so well together, because I may be able to get the torch work and colors quicker than Steve. He gets an image in his mind that he can't step away from. And sometimes that's where he's learned and he has grown to say, okay, the copper only wants to do this. I have to adjust my image a little bit and allow it to be that. and move on with that and adjust what I was going for. But he has great composition, and it's how we really pull things together and make it, I think, a more cohesive piece is by working together. So he always says I'm a better artist, but it's not true.
Believe me, it is.
For me, some of my favorite pieces are ones that are somewhat of an accident. We have a new piece we call it Fountain of Youth, and it's a 4-piece set. And somebody had bought, it's frequently inspired by a customer who challenges us to do something that we are not currently doing. So they had bought one piece of our art and they said, it's just too small for my wall. What could we put with it to make it, to fill the wall space? And so we worked with that customer and came up with a 4-piece set that just really turned out fantastic. And it was not by us necessarily. We did end up designing it, but we didn't have that initial inspiration to design it. It was really through a customer. And so sometimes those little levers that cause you to just go in a direction you hadn't thought about can really come up with something that we think is a way better product, and that it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, and as you pointed out just a little while ago, some of the pieces reflect more of a natural scene, and some of them are abstract in nature. And I think for me, trying to enhance the abstraction to the point where people find them pleasing enough is really something that I try to develop and work on. And some of them are for me have pushed my abilities in terms of having a cohesive piece in an abstract format, and that I've enjoyed a lot.
Abstract is deceptively difficult. As you think, somebody can look at it and go, oh, it's just abstract, and it's really hard to get a great composition in an abstract piece.
Just when you were creating it, you're like, yep, this needs to be round, or did you start with the piece being round?
We started with it round. We purposely said we need a new shape because everything was very, rectangular, square. So we wanted a new shape. So we added the circle and we created meditation, which is abstract, but yes, it is a pattern. But since then, we've expanded our circle a lot. And so we now have several designs in the circle. We have some with trees, we have some with water and sun reflection on the water, and some mountains in there. So, but the original intent was just to round out our display a little bit with some shapes that are not all square or rectangle.
What advice would you give to aspiring artists that are interested in explaining or exploring flame painting, or just working with metal in general?
I would say it's all about practice, 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 right? Anybody can get color on copper. Anybody can apply heat to copper and get color. It's learning to control it. And it really takes a commitment. So you have to want to do that to really learn to control it and get the designs you want on the copper and learn how to do it consistently. And that, I'd say, you be prepared for a 6-month effort to learn how to really watch and understand what the metal's going to do.
Yeah. I would also add the word patience to the description that Calisse provided. I mean, we've had situations where somebody said, "Oh, I can do that," and they've looked at our artwork and they said, "I can do that," and that person has invited us over to their pole barn, and they've took out a torch, and then they got a piece of copper and went like this, and they looked at it and just decided they'd never do that again. They, the patience is you have to learn, and understand that there is a process. They have to understand that the copper is a player in the process, and there is a technique. It's the same for any artist. That person has to learn the technique, the brush strokes, et cetera, et cetera. And patience is important because it is not going to happen in a week. We spent 6 months going from the little pieces of jewelry after we went out to get with Chip and Rachel, when we got the lessons from them, and they just work on really jewelry. It took us 6 months to go from the little pieces of jewelry to a piece that would be a wall hanging or something like that.
And every artist has their own style, and it holds true for flame painting as well. Mm-hmm. There are other flame painting artists. Mm-hmm. And so when we're at shows and somebody says, oh, I have a piece of this, and they show me the picture, I can almost always tell which artist it is. If it's a well-known artist that I know, I've seen their work, because they have their own style and their own techniques. And so, it takes patience to develop those, and you have to understand your art's never going to look like somebody else's art, because it's the same with a paintbrush. You're never going to duplicate and look exactly like somebody else's painting. So it's the same with our art as well. It's just a different medium.
Yeah, we've been at art shows literally where our booth was directly across the street from another flame painting artist, literally. And in that particular situation, they're a good friend. I mean, we get along famously, they with us and us with them. And yet the art, if you was to stand in the middle of the street and look at our art and look at their art, same process, you wouldn't be able to say that we're replicating exactly what they do and they with us. The art is broad enough in the style and the technique that it accommodates the differences within the artists themselves. And so that's been very satisfying, because we can go walk across the street and speak to somebody, and they will have some ideas about where their work is, and they can come over and look at ours. And so we've been able to grow from those types of exchanges.
Yeah, and while they're different, they do complement each other very well. So we'd have people come in our booth and buy something that they'd bought, to complement a piece they'd bought in the other booth, and so it worked out very well. But it was interesting to have that experience of being right next to another copper artist in the art show.
Yeah.
I get a lot of my inspiration from customers. So when we go to art shows and somebody says, oh, I have a lavender farm. Have you ever done lavender before? And you walk away and go, I think I'll do lavender. And a new piece is inspired. And so it's questions like that just, you never know what's going to inspire you. We've been sitting in a restaurant and there was just a lamp that had this abstract curve on it. And I said, I really like that shape of that curve, and that inspired an abstract piece of art. It was just a squiggle line on a lamp, and so you just never know what's going to catch your eye and say, oh, I feel inspired.
Yeah, and for me, I think one of the motivational aspects is what's next. I mean, as I said, if you looked at our initial pieces to where we are today, I think most people would say they can see the growth and they understand and appreciate the growth. But the question is, okay, how do we grow some more? And some of as Calisse says, some of it is just it just happens to be happenstance. Somebody says something to you, or they ask you to do a commission, and that commission pushes you to expand the art. And so to me, I want to see what's next, what we're capable next. So
I think the one thing that is really important for everybody to understand about this form of art is each piece is unique.
yeah,
And so if you see a picture and you say, I love that piece, and you ask for that and it's already sold, we can do something similar, but you'll never get that piece. It's each one is unique. And so while we say Fountain of Youth has been well received and is popular, each one is different. It's just the same, you know, it's a 4-piece set, maybe the same general design, but each one is unique. And so that's sometimes a difficult concept for people to grasp, saying, well, that one was a little bit bluer. Well, copper is a natural product. Some copper is going to be a little, you know, allow a bluer color than other pieces of copper, or, you know, maybe the temperature was different and just wouldn't give you that brightest blue that day. And so there's so many variables. It's a true unique art form, each piece.
yeah, it's because that variance that in the pieces, that when we do commissions, that it's really exciting because we've seen it, you know, and we may share some of the development of the piece with the client. But you know, when you hang it, you take it to their house or wherever, and you help them put it on the wall, and they stand back and they, you know, are pretty happy with it. That's what kind of motivates you to try do more and explore different approaches, realizing, as Calisse says, that there's no way at all that we even working all day and all night could replicate a piece that we've done before, because there's just too many variables at play.
How did you finally decide that you could put your pieces online and feel confident that people were going to be, for the most part, happy with what they received in the mail?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it's difficult to sometimes describe that each piece may be unique, and you're not going to have 100% people happy because they, you know, fell in love with a picture they saw, and the piece isn't going to be an exact replica of it. It's just impossible. You know, and so it was somewhat a leap of faith, and you know, see how it goes from there. And you know, so far we've been doing okay in that aspect of people understanding. Ironically, the people that have bought online have seen our art in person so far, is what we're finding. And so it's somebody that has a better understanding of the art form and has seen how dynamic it is in person, which can't always be, you can't see that in a photo. And so our art is more difficult to really capture that dynamic and the depth that it has in a photo. And so it'll be interesting to see if over time we do get customers that haven't seen it in person, because so far we're finding repeat customers are shopping online, not new customers, because they don't understand the art form.
But it is helpful to have an online presence, because then people can, especially if they have seen us work at a show, and we always have the spiel that we give, you know, at the show, talking about copper fire painting, and then, you know, when they show interest, we can explain the process to them. But then if they have somewhere that they can go and look at additional pieces. So, you know, I think that the show presence enables, I think, a better reaction to the website, particularly because of, you know, somebody saying, well, I want that piece. Well, there is no that piece, unless that happens still to be available. There is no that piece available. It's going to be very similar, perhaps, but not that piece. You know?
Yeah, and it would be very difficult to keep up online with always having a piece that is available, right? Because, we do art shows, and so our inventory is constantly turning over and it's evolving, and so it's a representation of what we do, not necessarily what is in inventory currently. I think for me, I said before, I feel art is visceral. When you see it, it brings up something. It means something to you. Some people can look at art and say, "Oh, that's pretty," but it's most impactful when you feel a meaning or a connection with it, and that's what I enjoy, is when somebody feels something, and it's personal to them, right? I mean, I may have created a piece of art that to me says meditation, but somebody else may look at it and feel something different, and that is perfectly okay. It's what it means to them is what's important.